when we're just chatting and seeing what's going on, it's just like really nice. And then that we get to know things we didn't know. So today, the topic that I had a little bit of reservations about, because it's not usually connected with mindfulness and compassion, which is how we see the big picture, how our mind works, and how we see the big picture and how we see the parts. And one of the reasons I'm very aware of that and interested in that, because years ago a friend of mine told me I was what he had majored in psychology. He said the way I thought was considered to be a synergistic way of thinking. And I asked him, what's that? And he said, well, you generally don't get the details until you see the big picture. You have to have a framework in which these things fit. And a lot of people don't think that way. They get all these bits of information and they build the bigger picture from the little parts. And so my brain just doesn't work that way. I mean, I have to see the big picture. Then I begin to understand how everything operates in that way. And then I started thinking about how mindfulness and compassion are influenced by these dynamics of the mind. Because from the very beginning I would talk about as a fundamental concept the conceptual framework, that we all operate within our conceptual framework, whether we're aware of it or not. The things that set up our expectations of how the world will behave, like when we get in our car and start driving on a highway, it's asphalt and not mud. Or we go to the office and the building is still there, and or people don't walk through walls in this dimension. Those sorts of things, just way beyond our conceptual framework. When we're dealing with issues in our own psyche, this becomes an important issue, because sometimes let's say we don't understand someone's behavior, or we don't understand our own behavior, and we're disturbed by it. We tend to try to analyze that behavior itself only. This happened because of that, and this happened because of that, etc., etc. And taking apart with logic, trying to deconstruct the story of how this came into being. Well, then I thought, and in counseling too, in therapy, that's not very useful. Because somebody could say, well, I had a client once. He said, I said, "Is there any trauma in your history?" And he said no. And anyway, a few weeks later, I found out. He told me that when he was 3 years old, he was hit by a car and dragged 50 feet under the car. And I said, "Well, how did that affect you?" He says, "I don't know." So his conceptual framework does not allow for that experience. It is, as a trauma, it stands outside of the conceptual framework. I didn't really want him to I didn't want to sort of dive into that. I wanted to support him that someday he would be able to integrate that experience. Then I found that a lot of people who are very detail-oriented, and then I've worked with people who are very organized, CPAs, managers, things like that, where all the pieces have to be working there. They're like, if somebody, this gal was working in payroll, I mean, she's got to keep all this stuff going. She has to see all the pieces and make sure that everything's functioning together. And the big picture is not her job. Her manager, that's her job, was to make sure the big picture, that everything's working right, well enough the way it should. And so I started thinking about how mindfulness, through probably more mechanisms than just this, but certainly through building meta-awareness, meaning our ability to be aware of what we're thinking and feeling at any particular time. Just that in and of itself helps us to expand our framework. We start seeing a bigger picture. And we start thinking more about the suchness or the substance of things, rather than just what the conventional view. It means this, or it means that, or this is good, or that's bad. etc. So, and then I started thinking, I think that's one of the reasons why we have mindfulness these days, because we really need, humanity in general, in my opinion, needs we're coming into a very big paradigm shift, a fundamental paradigm shift. And the people who are the innovators, John Kabat-Zinn was an innovator, Hazrat Inayat Khan was an innovator. He came in 1924 to the U.S. from India. And Yogananda, he was an innovator. And Taylor de Chardin was an innovator. These people who are, and Father Thomas Keating and Thomas Merton, these were all innovators, spiritually speaking. And so there must be something to this meditation in terms of a paradigm shift. And I started thinking about compassion. And compassion, because now more I'm thinking about compassion primarily as an activity, that it's an action, that it's a skill, that it's something that involves us directly in the workings of the world or other aspects of our personal life. And if we don't have the proper context, how can we really be effective? When Musk hooked up with Trump for a while, and those probably everybody knows this, but people in the U.S. here were outraged. I mean, they were like firebombing Tesla dealerships and stuff. And I saw a bumper sticker the other day and said, "I bought my Tesla before Musk went crazy." Stuff like that. And this is a paradigm clash. I mean, the Tesla was apparently a good car, a bit expensive, but it was going in the right direction in terms of electric vehicles. But the man behind the thing is like, I don't know if I call him a paradigm shifter innovator. He's pretty much old school business. So I was thinking about the relationship between mindfulness and compassion, which is historically an intimate connection. They have two wings of a single bird. And what that means in terms of helping us individually to have our own paradigm shifts, to have our greater shift to a greater and wider understanding. And so that's what I thought we'd talk about today and bring that up, because the idea of a conceptual framework is fundamental. I mean, that's to us. I have a client who's schizophrenic, and so I'm really thinking a lot about this, because he doesn't always have the same conceptual framework that we do. Stuff comes in and he goes, is that my thought or is that something else? His conceptual framework is never really kind of developed in a coherent manner. And then I think about things where in the U.S. and in Syria and in Russia and China, something will happen, and they say, "Oh," and then the official spin has absolutely nothing to do with what actually happened. So when that happens, that's like there's a conceptual framework that whoever's doing that stuff, that they want to maintain, and we know that it's just not true. And for instance, the interest in nature that has been around. Really, it kind of started in the 60s. People were of a different paradigm. Their conceptual framework included how the soil is doing and how the bees are doing, and how to build a house so that it's sustainable, or how to put in a modest garden in a manner so that the family can have some staples all year long, and things like that, and that how we need to start paying attention to and working with nature, or else we're all going to fry. I mean, this is our home here. So that paradigm started to occur with people now called fringe people or hippies or whatever. But now science has started studying this stuff and lending quite a bit of wonderful information to the understandings. In other words, initially it's an intuitive understanding, like organic food. I mean, I was around when that was a big thing. And first time I heard the idea of carrot juice, I went, what? That doesn't sound good at all. So it's a sort of intuitive shift for people. It's become a greater and greater shift, and we see that, yes, organic farming is really important. It's sustainable. Nutrition of the food is much, much better, and you get more crops, and there's so much to it. Since we're all of the either innovator or early adoption part of the bell curve here, so I was thinking that we address and think about mindfulness as a way of challenging and expanding our conceptual framework, at least to add that understanding or that idea to the practice, that might be very helpful. So that's how I came about that on that. So what we're going to do is a mindfulness meditation where we bring up an issue that, again, on a scale of 1 to 10 is like only a 3 or 4. It's a modest emotional impact, and it's one that ideally something that we've been thinking about but haven't been able to reconcile or resolve. We'll bring that into the mindfulness state and see what happens, because a lot of times when and I've seen this when I've only taught a few 8-week groups, but when I do that, somewhere about halfway people start seeing things differently, the relationships differently a little bit, and or their work differently. Whatever seemed unresolved suddenly begins to resolve. And part of that is, I haven't talked about this in a while, but they found out at Oxford Mindfulness Center that the brain is geared toward resolution. So if there's any kind of conflict or something contradictory or something unresolved, the brain works on it 24 hours a day, whether we're aware of it or not. And what they found out was that the more that happens, the less somebody is able to function in the world, which is why when somebody has depression, it's all these unresolved issues that are taking all of their energy and attention and awareness and providing no resolution whatsoever. And that's why they were so successful in their working with people with depression and mindfulness, because let the brain relax and let these things begin. A lot of them will self-resolve if we just give them the right environment, mental and emotional environment. So sometimes, and we've talked a lot about when in a perplexing situation, difficult situation, to pause. And when we do that, we have the ability to all of a sudden be able to come up with and find a really creative solution. But it doesn't come from logic and reason. It comes from somewhere else. And so that somewhere else seems to be our natural mind, so to speak. And so when we do the mindfulness meditation, one way to look at it is what we're doing is we're relaxing the fetters of reason and logic. We're just relaxing those constraints. So when we do that, a lot of things will sort of self-resolve, because the problem is that a lot of times the things we're not resolving, there's a lot of emotion involved, but we don't have the means to resolve it, so we just keep in this loop. That really bothers me, I don't know what to do about it. That really bothers me, I don't know what to do about it, over and over and over again. So sometimes when we just sit for a while, just relax, a lot of things will resolve all by themselves. And then, as I said in the email, is that creates an environment in which we can most beneficially take action. And that action is compassion. But if we're confused, or we're motivated by anger, or we're motivated by fear, or whatever it is, we don't really know how to codify or to understand the field that we're looking at. Like, fire bombing the Tesla dealerships. It's like, it doesn't make any sense, really. I mean, what? It just doesn't make it's politically counterproductive. Let me put it that way. So if everybody instead would have sat down and meditate on this, there would have been a much different solution. So our actions depend on our conceptual framework, how we see our conceptual framework, what we see as cause and effect. And if it's skewed by logic and reason, then we only come up with solutions of logic and reason. But if we pause and we relax and invite this pause space, this mind space to come in there, it seems to open up the more creative, I guess is the best word, creative thinking and spontaneous thinking that we're capable of, the neocortex. And then that's why we'll find answers or directions sometimes, and when we do that. I mean, I've had clients that okay, we've got a white noise thing going there. I might be able to do something about that. Compassion obviously is a good idea, but it's far more the actual, when we get involved in compassion and applying compassion in our lives into how we respond to the world, the turmoil in the world, it becomes a much more important question. And so it's important to learn how we can respond compassionately in these circumstances. And it's a challenge, and that's why sometimes if we do something we think this is going to help and it doesn't, we go back to mindfulness and say, what did I miss? And then we get an idea again, let's do this. And that seems to work, so we do that. And again, it comes back to the relationship between the mindfulness meditation, mind training, and and compassion. But for the compassion to be effective, we need the space of mindfulness. It's kind of to sum up what I'm saying. And so when we think of it that way, so like for instance, if a relative is having trouble and we're really perplexed and upset by it, a lot of emotion involved, the best thing to do is just sit for a while and not think anything about the issue, to just sit for a while and let it percolate. A lot of times, we'll get an idea and it'll work really nicely, and we'll begin. And as usual, just settling down. Just settling into the present moment. And sometimes taking a few intentional deep breaths can help us settle, soothe that reptilian brain. And observing how the breathing slows and perhaps our field of awareness widens. And when anything arises, a thought or an emotion, just acknowledging it and releasing it, and bring our awareness back to our present moment. And as we do that, the body often relaxes. And the mind and the emotions tend to settle down too. allowing us just to sit. Because wherever our mind goes, our body is right here, right now. Sort of allowing ourselves to sink into this space, kind of ease into it. Allowing the extraneous stuff to fall away. And just settling into our mind space as best we can. And the thoughts continue to arise, simply letting them go and returning to the present moment. And allowing ourselves to encounter this space of just being now and again. And as we continue to settle into this space, bringing to mind an incident or an issue that is mild but unresolved. One that perhaps our rational mind or whatever tools we have hasn't worked so far toward its resolution. And bringing it clearly to mind in all its dynamics. Until it feels fully present. And simply sit with it. Allow it to be as it is, as if you're sitting with a good friend without any need to talk or discuss anything. And if we begin to analyze, recognizing that and letting that go, and being open to whatever needs to be communicated from the experience or the issue. And if judgment or criticism comes up, simply recognizing that and letting it go. Thoughts come up like, if only I had, if only whatever, and letting those go as well. And if our mind wanders, simply recognizing that and coming back to the body, home base. So that we might be able to hold the whole experience at one time together. The mind and the body and the presence. Of the pause. And just seeing what happens when we cease being involved in the issue or trying to fix it or understand it in a different way. In a sense, letting it speak of itself if it wishes. allowing us to continue to observe in the stillness as best we can. And just observing what occurs. And now inviting compassion into the situation, like a light or a flow of meaning. Into the situation. And again, just observing the chemistry between the compassion and the issue, or whatever it is. Like you've added two elements to a single crucible. And just continue to observe for a while, maintaining the awareness of the issue and the surroundings of the atmosphere of compassion. And whatever occurs is exactly the right thing to occur. And now allowing that compassion to expand into your entire being. In this present moment, and into your past, present, and future, your whole being. And savoring and absorbing the experience as best you can, allowing the body to soak up this experience. So that in the moment when the bell rings again, you can bring this with you as you go about your day. And come back to it at any time.